Hail and well-met slayers of giants. Welcome to Chapter 9 of my serial novel, Tilting at Windmills. Remember, this is a draft. I'll be very grateful for your feedback throughout, so please comment away on whatever platform you're finding this, and become a patron of my Patreon or subscribe to my Substack so you'll get a little reminder each week when a new chapter comes out. So here is Tilting at Windmills, Chapter 9. Well-timed words and wards. Timing is everything. Or more accurately, everything exists because of timing. This cannot be overstated. In the beginning, in that let there be light moment, which wasn't technically a moment because it was just before time itself came into being. If time itself behaved differently, or if energy and matter moved at different rates in that pre-time instant, maybe the energy would never have converted itself into matter at all. Or, had the matter moved just a tiny bit faster, all the hydrogen atoms would have just flitted away into infinity, a bubble as thin as a single atom filled with nothing, expanding into nothing forever. If, on the other hand, those atoms had moved just a tiny bit more slowly, they would have fallen back in on themselves, creating a black hole of next to nothing, sucking with all its might on the nothing beyond itself. Everything in the universe exists because those hydrogen atoms moved at the Goldilocks speed necessary to swirl and form the first generation of stars, then fry themselves and poop out the helium atoms that became the heavier atoms which eventually became the space fertilizer that congealed into planets, and you, and the words you are reading, and this narrator who doesn't really exist, probably because of an error in timing. The same goes for everything inside that universe, including Benjamin's marriage. The relationship had begun with a moment of serendipity of truly global proportions. On the morning of January 6th of 2021, Benjamin awoke to a world slogging through a pandemic, and he felt momentarily buoyed by some good news. His preferred candidate had just won a Senate seat in Georgia, a state far from where he lived, but this race was good news for the entire nation because it shifted the balance of power in the Senate from the far-right party to the center-right party, and provided hope for a temporary reprieve from living under the thumb of people who nodded along as they were told to drink bleach. Then, by mid-morning, news was coming in that a rally in support of the outgoing president had turned violent, and it looked like a coup might successfully prevent the transfer of power to the new president. Oh, and it was Benjamin's birthday. By evening, having spent his supposedly celebratory day watching footage of the same kind of racist chuds he'd been confronting in Salem and Portland, now storming the Capitol building in D.C., beating the police officers there nearly to death, and quite literally smearing their feces on the walls as a testament to their public policy positions, Benjamin couldn't take it anymore. He turned to his son and announced the two of them deserved the best steak dinners their town had to offer. He called up the nicest restaurant and made his birthday order. When he went there, barely inside the door of course, masked to protect the two employees in the otherwise empty restaurant, he got to gabbing with the manager about the day's news. He noticed she was wearing guillotine earrings, and immediately guessed she shared his perspective on the day's political events. Their conversation, though brief, was one of the best Benjamin had experienced in the decades-long year of COVID isolation. And, as he returned to his car, he noticed the manager had added 2 free desserts to his bagged steak dinners. On the plastic lid of the top one, she'd written, "Because I'm Antifa, and I can." Filled with a kind of joy he hadn't felt in months, Benjamin plopped down into the driver's seat of his car and said out loud, "Why am I not dating her?" Acting before his self-doubt could set in, he messaged her and asked her if she'd be interested in going on a date. 2 days later, the couple met for the perfect COVID date, a dog walk. The area had just been hit with historic low temperatures and was still well below freezing. The couple and canine walked in a large rectangle which took them near the shore of the Willamette River, then up the town's cute main street, then back again. Benjamin's dog, external validation, Evie for short, was a trooper, indulging the humans as long as her little legs would carry her until she was too exhausted and plopped down by a freezing metal bench. There the two humans sat and talked for hours, until both became concerned for the dog's health. Later, Benjamin and his wife would talk about the timing. Any earlier, one or both would have been too deep in their COVID depression to consider a date. Any later, they might have found a different date or given up on dating entirely. Their meet-cute required the alignment of a global pandemic, a birthday, and a failed coup. And it all came together. And now, 5 years later, the timing had to be even more perfect to save them. The odds of a failed coup during a global pandemic on Benjamin's birthday are, at least as of the time of this writing, 1 in infinity. But by the time Benjamin had moved to Cleveland, the state of the marriage was such that Benjamin's wife was just coming to terms with its complete dissolution, and Benjamin had already fully accepted it months earlier, so the conditions for a reconciliation felt even more remote. And yet, after Benjamin read his soon-to-be ex's email about her desire to cut off contact to stop herself from re-inflicting the wounds of her grief over the end of the marriage, he lost it. He didn't scream at the sky or smash his parents' dishes or run his new car into a freeway barrier. No, he exploded in a measured, writerly way. He opened a blank document and composed a letter, the first paragraph devoted to the presumption it would never be shared. After he'd finished it, he set it aside, and then his soon-to-be ex messaged about something innocuous. When they connected by phone, she could hear his anger in his gritted teeth from 2,450 miles away. She gave just enough opening, he didn't need much cajoling, and he read her the letter. As he read it, he broke down into the kind of tears he'd longed for in Spain but couldn't find. The good cry, which feels wretched but results in relief. And though the letter hadn't been strategic on his part, in fact, perhaps because it hadn't been that kind of careful, hesitant communication overlaying an unsuccessfully concealed anger, which had become his normal attempt at conversation in Spain, his soon-to-be ex heard him and understood in a deeper way. Both of them had been sharing their lists of grievances, first as a kind of competition to wrestle for control of the narrative, then as autopsy, but Benjamin felt his soon-to-be ex refused to cut deep enough into the corpse. She could hear and acknowledge and even apologize for his list just as he did for hers, but to Benjamin, her apologies always felt couched in a layer of self-protection, a product of her childhood and early relationship trauma, and he'd sadly accepted she would never be able to get beyond the need to keep herself safe first. He could understand where this came from and make allowances for it, and he can even acknowledge the trauma response had ultimately made their relationship impossible. But until that letter, he couldn't admit her understandable prioritization of her own safety pissed him off. And then, when he said so, she got it. She saw it. She heard it. She understood it deeply. She fully realized that, while they could both make mistakes, Benjamin's red line was real. When he said they could work through everything but the silent treatment, he meant it. He really would leave. So trying to measure whose failures were first and whose were bigger really didn't matter. He'd said he couldn't bear the silent treatment. The term silent treatment sounded so intentional and targeted it made her defensive. She hadn't always done it intentionally. Sometimes it had come from depression, sometimes from anxiety about their situation, and, she conceded, sometimes from spite, when she felt he'd abandoned her to focus on the work he thought he needed to do to provide for them. But in that phone conversation, for the first time, she fully realized all three kinds of silence sound the exact same. So many times, he'd told her he couldn't bear to be married to someone who wouldn't talk to him. He'd told her he would leave. And he'd left. Facts beyond dispute. And now, in an effort to protect herself from the dissolution caused by the silent treatment, she was electing the silent treatment. By the end of the phone call, Benjamin started to feel his assumption might have been wrong. He'd planned to move on with his life, certain she'd never stop protecting herself enough to really hear his reason for leaving. But maybe, just maybe, if she could commit to maintaining communication, his one prerequisite for any kind of reconciliation, maybe they could show one another they really could talk through everything else. That seemed far off, but it was a start. Here's where the timing becomes so monumental. The day after that conversation, his soon-to-be ex started her new job in Portland. The two of them committed to another phone call so he could hear about her first day of work. Then Benjamin received his first response to an overture on a dating app. He chatted a bit with the woman in Cleveland, and they arranged a coffee date. He logged the appointment in his digital calendar. A digital calendar which still populated his soon-to-be ex-wife's calendar. So while she navigated the normal anxiety of a first day at a new job, she noticed her soon-to-be ex-husband had scheduled a date. If that date had been a couple days earlier, Benjamin might not have bothered to compose his angry letter, let alone share it. He might have resigned himself to the conclusion his soon-to-be ex would never be able to get past what he saw as her need to protect herself from responsibility for his deal-breaker issue by competing with her own. He might have decided he'd moved on, and that would have been that. Or if that coffee date had been scheduled some days later, perhaps his soon-to-be ex would have moved on sufficiently to not want to make any dramatic recommitment of her own. But because it happened at exactly that time, just when she fully comprehended what she needed to do to make the marriage viable, and just when it seemed he was going to move on, a window cracked open. Just a sliver at first. She came into the next conversation angry and despairing because of his forthcoming date. He came into it hopeful because of the previous night's call and unsure why she was suddenly backtracking. She told him she'd seen the notification. Benjamin apologized for ruining her day with the timing of it and tried to assure her the date was just coffee, and that he'd come away from their previous conversation feeling some kind of reconciliation was possible. She let him know she would not be able to bear it if he went out on some date, one thing led to another, and he slept with someone else, or went on a series of dates, or ended up in some other relationship while she believed they still had a shot. Since he'd come around to the notion they would be better able to work on their relationship together rather than apart, she offered to jump on a plane that very night, fly to Cleveland, and drive back with him across the country. She'd provide him a place to stay, in a city, in a state where he already had a teaching license, and a chance to rebuild his life with her. And she would go into it knowing the silent treatment really was a deal-breaker for him. For Benjamin's part, he'd know all the ways he needed to change. Foremost would be his inclination to hide from stress in work, allowing his sleep schedule to become so flipped that they couldn't share enough waking hours for him to support her emotionally and occupy their bed at the same time. But he felt confident. If she could remember, he depended upon the sound of her voice, and if he could remember, she depended upon the comfort of his presence. All the other problems they'd run into could be addressed as they came up. He'd failed at his escape to Spain, failed in his attempt to survive and provide for his family as a writer, failed in so many ways. But if they could make it work, that would be the most important failure averted. His most important relationship preserved, a vision of a real future with someone he loved. Of course, this was terribly exciting for them both. Benjamin sat his parents down, again, to explain his dramatic life change, again. He spoke with his son and his brother, feeling foolish about the seemingly melodramatic soap opera life that was relocating him after only a few days in Cleveland. He'd feel that same shame when explaining it to his friends in Oregon, the ones who'd already attended 2 parties where they'd said their goodbyes forever, only to have him return. This narrator also feels that discomfort at having to recount such a sensational, pathetic tale, and this narrator doesn't get to enjoy the counterweight of Benjamin's eagerness to be reunited with his no longer soon-to-be ex-wife. Much like those friends, Benjamin's son and brother expressed joy at Benjamin's happiness and withheld their judgments, and this narrator hopes you, dear reader, will be similarly forgiving in your critical analysis of this paired tale, understanding an accounting of the madmen's relationship roller coaster is necessary to explain why his hallucination found his way to Cleveland and then made his way back. Of course, Rolando had no idea his sire's marital renewal had any effect on the knight's quest, and he couldn't have cared less about some loser's near divorce, since he'd committed himself to something far larger, saving a country and maybe even the whole world from a hostile curse. Besides, a djinn had just tried to kill him, and that creature now floated on the far side of the room, screaming and pleading for his mercy. His situation was clearly the more pressing of the two. Gambling the djinn wouldn't try the lightning a second time while begging, Rolando stepped in front of the protection of Serge's sword, hoping his former squire, now trainee, would step up alongside him with Baganawatig still raised, ready to absorb any fresh lightning bolts if the djinn changed tactics. I pledge we will parley with you and not attempt to do battle until we understand your grievance and decide whether or not an honorable duel is necessary. Come down and speak with us, and we will not attack you. Really? The djinn said. His low voice made the pathetic question almost laughable. Yes, I am a knight-errant. Honor is everything to me, and I have called for parley. So I will not attack you as we converse unless you attempt to attack me again, though we have both seen that is foolhardy, since we are prepared for any such attack. This last bit was more than an exaggeration. It was the kind of lie Rolando would have deemed dishonorable, except he made certain allowances for strategic feints in battle and negotiation, and he felt this situation qualified. In truth, he'd been completely unprepared for the djinn, disguised as a human tattoo artist, to point a tattoo gun at him from across the room and launch a bolt of lightning in his direction. And he had no way of knowing Serge's sword would protect him, nor did he know if it would work again. But a bluff seemed in order. Okay, I won't blast you again. But you have to understand, I get a call telling me a couple of guys are going to come in and kill me, and describing you to a T, and then you come to my door. Of course I'm going to try to defend myself. I see. But we hadn't done anything hostile. You were defending yourself from an accusation, not from us. It seems you have been manipulated. He looked at Serge. As have I. I suspect I know exactly who called you. Was it a man who sounded very old? For a human, absolutely. Older than any human I've ever heard, I think. Rolando looked down at the tattoo chair in front of him, the small stool next to it, the stainless steel tray with the artist's tools between. Garibald of Gaul, he said to himself. Then to Serge, my contact in Spain is a man named Garibald of Gaul, an ancient wizard, vizier to kings and presidents and countries' intelligence services. He works to protect the magical community. Or so I believed. But he was the only person who knew we would be coming here. To the djinn, he said, I was misinformed as well. Garibald told me you were an apothecary who could provide medicine for my comrade in arms, Sir Sanchez, guardian of justice and servant of the Lady of the Great Lake. At this, the djinn began floating down to their level. Oh, Ariel Honan, goddess of the cat people? I know her, she's great. Right, Serge agreed. She gave me this sword. It's called Baganawatig. Ah, the tree struck by lightning, the djinn translated. That explains that. Rolando held up his sword, still safely in its scabbard. She gifted me my new blade as well. It is called Bakadawabide. The Black Teeth. Cool. Then he returned his attention to Serge, far less impressed by Rolando's sword than the older man liked. So you came here looking for medicine? Serge nodded. I think it's just a strep infection or something, but we tried to go to an urgent care facility and... The djinn shook his head. Ugh, the whole healthcare system here is fucked. All the people who work in it admit that if you proposed a system like this, everyone would think you were crazy. But the humans don't change it. Sure, they tinker around the edges, but never anything that risks breaking the profit motive. They really do see sickness and injury as sources of wealth here. You Americans. He shook his bald head again, the glowing tattoos fading slightly as he calmed, but still exuding enough light to make the gesture a little light show. This nation is cursed, you know. Rolando nodded vigorously, as though Serge required more confirmation of this point. Yes, this is why we are here. We are on a quest to find the origin of the curse and confront it. Only... He looked over at some of the djinn's designs framed on the wall, barely seeing them. I was tasked with this quest by Garibald of Gaul, and now he is trying to have me killed? So does he want the curse to remain? If so, why send me at all? Is he behind the curse? A single wizard. This was low on my list of theories. He pulled the small black moleskin notebook out of his pocket, along with a monogrammed silver ballpoint, and he began making notes. I don't think it's just one guy either, the djinn said. He turned to Serge while Rolando was occupied with his notes. Maybe this Garibald of Gaul didn't feel up to confronting you himself and thought a djinn would do a more thorough job. Rolando nodded, still looking at his notebook, and spoke to Serge. Jinn are far more powerful magic users than any human wizard. This fellow here is an elemental spirit capable of bending reality. Thousands of years old. Tens of thousands, Jinn said. Their magic could overcome any spell I have learned, and anything Garibald knows. If we did not have weapons given to us by a primordial being, our quest would have come to an abrupt end. Lucky timing, Serge said. Rolando stepped back and made room for the djinn to float down and return to his stool. If I may ask, what is your name, Sir Jinn? I have many names, of course, and a few would give you power over me or cause you harm to speak or even hear, but you may call me Nasir. More of a title than a name, and it will be safe for both of us. It's nice to meet you, Nasir, Serge said. I'm Sir Sanchez, title. He made a yada 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 with his empty hand. Call me Serge. And you went with Guardian of Justice? Serge hooked a thumb at the back of his leather jacket and half-twisted so Nasir could read it. I'm not even a baseball fan, but we thought it might help with Ariel Honan if we played the Homer card. The djinn shook his head again. Maybe, but it's a shame. Protector was right there. Serge the Protector? Shit, Serge said. Didn't even think of that. Do not fear, Sir Sanchez, Rolando said. Some future feat will add to your fame and give you an opportunity to add to your titles, I am certain. But first, we must attend to your health status. Sir Nasir, Do you know where we might find a very talented wielder of magic, perhaps one who is greater than any human wizard or apothecary, who might be able to provide medicine for my friend?" Nasir smiled. "You know, I do know someone like that, but he doesn't work with potions, or at least not the kind you drink." He looked at Serge. "Ever gotten a tattoo before?" Serge looked at the images hanging in the frames. "Yeah, just one, but mine's a little embarrassing, especially compared to these. I was young and had money from my first job and—" "What did you get?" Nasir said, his tone teasingly reproachful. "It's Goofy." "What is it of?" "Goofy, the Disney character, and it's not even very good." "Show me," the djinn ordered. Serge tucked his sheathed sword under his right arm, then fumbled to pull his left out of his coat and shirt, raising the shirt over his shoulder and showing the image to Nasir. The djinn stared at it far longer than it deserved. "Your artist is lucky he's not getting sued for this. Maybe he does a bad job to avoid copyright infringement. It could also be the big bad wolf from Looney Tunes, or," he tilted his head, "a bad Rorschach ink blot." "Yeah, it's not good." "No, but I think I can cover this for you in a way that will still make the ward functional." Serge turned to Rolando for an explanation. "He paints magical wards." "Magic words?" "Wards, like protections. To ward off, with an A. All those he wears himself, wards." "I could give you both a ward if you'd like," Nasir said. Rolando perked up. "I would like that very much, Senor Nasir." Serge leaned toward Rolando. "A few minutes ago this guy tried to kill you. Aren't jinn, tricky?" "They are not human and do not always share human interests, and they can be very dangerous if humans attempt to enslave them or compel them." He gestured to Nasir. "Understandably." The jinn nodded and got to work preparing his tools. "But they are not evil, as a rule. Yes, they can change their appearance, so they have a reputation for dishonesty. But if Nasir has offered us a ward during an honorable parley, I am inclined to trust him. He seems like a nice fellow." "Okay," Serge said, sounding anything but convinced. "But just for the sake of argument, couldn't he tattoo something that would hurt us instead of helping?" "Oh, sure," Nasir said. "I could give you a ward that would magically protect you from digesting food, so you'd vomit and have diarrhea until you die of dehydration. Or one that would ward off air, so you'd suffocate right on the table. But why would I do that? I have a reputation to uphold." "So what will your ward give us?" "Depends. We haven't discussed payment. But for the right price, I think I can cover up that Goofy with one that will cure your current illness and prevent you from getting sick in the future." "Like ever?" "It's not 100%. It's a protection, a magical ward, like a barrier," the djinn explained. "It makes it less likely illness will get through." "Are there side effects?" Nasir shrugged. "You may live until someone kills you in some other way." "That sounds like a benefit." "Come talk to me in a few hundred years and you can tell me if it's a benefit or a curse to not be able to get sick and die. Some humans don't like it. I don't always understand your species. You did invent employer-based healthcare after all." "I can't argue with that." He turned to Rolando. "What do you think?" "What would you like in the form of payment, Senor Jin?" "I have a cousin who lives in Utah. I'd like a message delivered to him. An unfriendly message. One that can only be delivered by a couple of brave knights-errant, protected from his magic by my wards. You scratch my back, I'll poke your skin, but in reverse order." Rolando leaned toward Serge. "Wards which can protect us from something as powerful as a djinn would also be very helpful in our current quest." "And we're already heading in that direction," Serge acknowledged. "A little side quest wouldn't be so out of the way." He looked at Nasir. "What's the message?" The djinn told them the whole story of his falling out with his cousin and what he wanted them to do about it. Armed with the details, they were more than convinced the quest fell within the purview of their charge as knights-errant. "Oh, fuck yeah," Serge said. He sang the last word of his battle cry. "Let's go!" "I concur," Rolando said. So the two men received tattoos from Nasir. When the artist finished the piece on Serge's shoulder, he wiped off the specks of blood with a paper towel soaked in a special iodine tincture, then rinsed it and covered it in skin seal. The tattoo began to glow, the soft blue light visible briefly in the sunlight coming through the bank of windows set high in the basement room's street-facing wall. As the glow gleamed, then faded, Serge felt his illness vanish, expelled from his body. His headache cleared and the scratchy pain in his throat stopped throbbing with each swallow. "It worked," he told Nasir. The djinn simply nodded as he focused his attention on the ward he drew on Rolando's back. The older knight had chosen a location he felt might be easiest to hide, on his spine between his shoulder blades. Now he was learning why many people avoid locations where the needle feels so close to the bone. He grit his teeth and tried to picture the face of the Lady Nuria. So many years had passed since he'd last seen her, he wished he'd taken a picture, though to do so without her knowledge would have been dishonorable, and to ask it of her in their first and only meeting would have likely gone poorly. Rolando's new tattoo didn't react in the same way as Nasir cleaned it, and Rolando assumed this was because he harbored no illness for the ward to expel. If the two men had done a careful comparison, they would have identified the flourishes which distinguished the symbols, giving Rolando's slightly different properties. The next day, the new tattoo only simmered like a localized severe sunburn, something Rolando might have easily ignored if he wasn't spending so many hours with his back against the passenger seat of the rental. As the knights made their way to Chicago, he sat up ramrod straight, trying to keep the sensitive spot from pressing on the seat. Luckily, the first leg of their journey was the shortest. In a little more than 7 hours, they'd arrived in the Midwest's biggest metropolis. "You know, I've never had real Chicago-style pizza," Serge said. "While we're here investigating, do you think we'll have time to find some?" Rolando's eyes flashed. "Oh, Sir Sanchez, I know just the place. You are in for a treat." If you're excited about this project, please subscribe on YouTube or like and share on TikTok or Reels or whatever app you're on now. And if you're willing to support me as I craft this novel in serial form, please consider supporting my Substack or Patreon. Each week I'll give a shout out to some of those patrons. This week I'm thanking Substack subscribers Brian Zauber-Reed, Chris Early, and Beth Gibbs, author of Pacific North Witch. If any of you listeners are creators and have something to plug, please email NotAPipePublishing at NotAPipePublishing@gmail.com. See you back here next week for Chapter 10 of Tilting at Windmills. Teaser: if you've ever had real Chicago deep dish, you already know magic is involved. So join us for Chapter 10 to find out how the magic is baked in.